Founders Day provides a special opportunity for us as a community to celebrate the heritage of Berea College in a way that unites us in a common legacy as it inspires us to build upon that legacy in our lives today. First, this convocation celebrates the vision and perseverance of John G. Fee. It also is an evening to celebrate our African American pioneers, specifically the Reverend Dr. James Bond, an 1892 graduate of Berea College, who was committed to living out the vision as Fee expressed it in the college motto, "God is made of one blood, all peoples of the earth." By sharing this part of Berea's history with you this evening, it is our hope that we will not only increase our understanding of John Fee's legacy, but we will also revive the memory of the Reverend Dr. James Bond in a way that inspires us all to carry on the special work of Berea College today as it presents itself to us in our world. Well, we gather this evening to celebrate the legacy of John G. Fee. I invite you to read the summary of Fee's life provided in your program. Fee's faith was both spiritually and practically grounded in God's impartial love. Fee believed that such impartial love affirmed the equality of all people, black and white, men and women. He truly believed that God is made of one blood, all people of the earth, and he acted upon that belief. He also believed it was crucial for all of us to act upon the belief that we have, and he did so by helping found a community and an educational community in Berea that welcomed and empowered a diverse student body. Fee's Christian faith was truly radical in his day, and unfortunately, it's still uncommon in our own. The second reason we are gathered here this evening is to honor one of Berea's early graduates who embodied Fee's vision. James Bond not only benefited from the unusual educational opportunity provided by Berea College, but he also considered John Fee his spiritual father and said that he was trying to apply Fee's founding principle in his own roles as an administrator and as an educator, and also as a minister. James Bond was born a slave in 1863 on a farm in Anderson County in Kentucky. He and his mother were later emancipated, and yet he worked on that farm until he was the age of 16. Up to this point, Bond attended school for only 2 months each year. So in 1879, James decided to pursue his education more formally and fully and embarked for Berea on foot, leading a calf that his mother gave him to pay for his entrance fee. Because he took several years off from school in order to work full-time and save money for his education, it took James Bond 13 years to complete his high school and college degree. During his last semester at Berea, James took John Fee's course, Evidences of Christianity, and graduated with a BS from Berea College with those words ringing in his ears in 1892. James Bond stayed with his mother for a short period of time before going on to Oberlin to study theology and pursue his calling of ministry. At Oberlin, he met Jane Alice Brown, and the two were married in 1895. 9 months later, James earned his Bachelor of Divinity degree from Oberlin. He received 2 honorary degrees from Berea College, a Master of Science degree in 1897, and a Doctor of Divinity degree in 1901. James serves as a pastor at churches in Birmingham, Alabama, Nashville, Tennessee, and Atlanta, Georgia. He spent 7 years as professor of homiletics at Fisk's Theological Seminary and also served for 10 years as the secretary for the Kentucky YMCA and also as the director of the Kentucky Interracial Commission. Wherever he worked and lived, James Bond advocated increased educational opportunities and civil rights for African Americans. James Bond also had an outstanding career in the field of education. Even while pastoring churches in other states, he made a close relationship and maintained a close relationship with Berea College, and he served as a trustee and board secretary from 1896 to 1912. The passage of the Kentucky Day Law in 1904 prohibited Berea from continuing to offer a racially integrated education. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court upheld this decision when the college made its appeal. However, from 1907 to 1914, James Bond was instrumental in the fundraising, establishment, and administration of the Lincoln Institute, an all-black school founded in Shelbyville, Kentucky, that was intended to continue Fee's original vision of interracial education. He also served as a secretary of the Lincoln Board of Trustees, and through his affiliation with the Kentucky YMCA, Bond organized summer camps for African American boys and girls. He was also a service director at Camp Taylor, where he offered soldiers night classes during World War I. His deep commitment to education is also evident in the fact that all 6 of his children received college educations. Whether serving as a pastor or an educational administrator, James Bond made extraordinary contributions to his community and also to his country. He strove to increase educational and vocational opportunities for African Americans and to promote respectful yet provocative interracial dialogue. In an article published a couple of years before his death, Dr. Bonds wrote, quote, "I have consented to write the story of the education of my family with the sincerest hope that it may help to impress upon our young people the tremendous importance of collegiate training, and further might inspire young parents to dedicate their lives to the most sacred obligation of giving their children the best education possible." Thus today we echo the sentiments of the Reverend Dr. James Bond and acknowledge his own accomplishment in the presence of his descendants. But before we turn to the act of giving our award for the day, we'll have the special treat of having Eric Bond introduce our speaker, Julian Bond, who will reflect upon this family's heritage, so that we might have a more personal look at this very special family.
Horace Julian Bond was born on January 14, 1940, in Nashville, Tennessee. His father, Dr. Horace Mann Bond, was a well-known educator, and his mother, Julia Bond, was a librarian. His grandfather, the Reverend Dr. James Bond, was a 1982 graduate of Berea College. Julian Bond attended the George School, a Quaker institution in suburban Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He received his BA in English from Morehouse College, and as a student, he helped found and later served as communications director for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, which spearheaded protests and voter registration. He was also a founder of the Committee on Appeal for Human Rights, another student organization engaged in nonviolent sit-in protests that led to the integration of Atlanta's movie theaters, lunch counters, and parks. Julian Bond has also had a distinguished political career, serving on the Georgia General Assembly for more than 20 years. He was nominated at the 1968 Democratic National Convention for the office of Vice President of the United States, a nomination that he could not accept due to his youth at that time. He is the former president and current president emeritus of the Southern Poverty Law Center, served as the president of the Atlanta branch of the NAACP for 11 years, and has been chairman of the NAACP Board of Directors since 1998. Julian is also an accomplished writer. He is the author of A Time to Speak, A Time to Act, The Movement in Politics, and co-editor of Lift Every Voice, and has contributed and written introductions, forewords, and prefaces for many other books.
If only Eric could introduce me every place I go. Thank you a great deal, Eric, to President Shen, friends, and members of the Bond family. We're good-looking people, aren't we? I very much appreciate the kind invitation Eric has given me and the kind response that you have made. I'm fearful, however, that should I live to be 150 and over the course of those years invent cures for all of the world's dread diseases and invent marvelous machines, that when I'm finally put to rest on my tombstone, they will write, hosted Saturday Night Live. This was years ago, in April of 1977. It used to be a comedy show, you know, and I was very pleased to be associated with it. Now, you've heard President Shen give you a list of the public accomplishments of James Bond. He achieved much. He went far beyond what most would consider lowly origins. He would be more than delighted that Berea is offering this recognition and that the award is named for John Fee. He called him one of the best friends I ever had. The affection he felt for Reverend Fee is illustrated in the obituary he offered when Fee died and in the present-day Bonds who carry the Fee name as part of their own. I want to talk about the private man and let him talk to you in his own words. He was born, as you've heard, in Kentucky in 1863. Freedom didn't come for him until the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865. He and his mother were property like a horse or a chair. As a young girl, 13, 14, she never knew her exact age. She'd been given away as a wedding present to a new bride. And when that bride became pregnant, her husband, that's my great-grandmother's owner and master, exercised his right to take his wife-slave as his mistress. That union produced 2 children, one of them my grandfather. You've heard at age 16, barely able to read or write, he hitched his tuition, a steer to a rope, walked 75 miles across Kentucky, knocks on the door of Berea College, and Berea let him in. And 16 years later, he graduated, and the college asked him to deliver the commencement address. He said then, the pessimist from his corner looks out on the world of wickedness and sin, and blinded by all that is good or hopeful in the condition and the progress of the human race, bewails the present state of affairs and predicts woeful things for the future. In every cloud he beholds a destructive storm, in every flash of lightning an omen of evil, and in every shadow that falls across his path a lurking foe. But he forgets that the clouds also bring life and hope, that the lightning purifies the atmosphere, that shadow and darkness prepare for sunshine and growth, and that hardships and adversity nerve the race as the individual for greater efforts and grander victories. Greater efforts, grander victories. That was the promise made by the generation born in slavery more than 150 years ago. That was the promise made by the generation that won the Great World War for democracy more than 5 decades ago. That is the promise made by the generation that brought democracy to America's darkest corners more than 4 decades ago, and that is the promise we must all seek to honor today. The Civil War that freed my grandfather was fought over whether blacks and whites shared a common humanity. Less than 10 years after it ended, the nation chose sides with the losers and agreed to continue black repression for almost 100 years. Now, American slavery was a human horror of staggering dimensions, a true crime against humanity. The profits it produced endowed great fortunes. They enriched generations, and its dreadful legacy embraces us all today. The historian John Hope Franklin writes, all whites benefited from American slavery. All blacks had no rights they could claim to call their own. All whites including the vast majority who owned no slaves, were not only encouraged but authorized to exercise dominion over all slaves, thereby adding to the system of control. Even poor whites, Dr. Franklin writes, benefited from the legal advantage they enjoyed over all blacks, as well as from the psychological advantage of having a group beneath them. Most living Americans, he says, do have a connection with slavery. They've inherited the preferential advantage if they are white, and the loathsome disadvantage if they are black, and these positions are virtually as alive today as they were in the 19th century. James Bond understood slavery, and he understood slavery's legacy. Although the Bonds of my generation never met him, we fortunately have his words, his memories, to remind us of the struggle, and to remind us that that struggle is never ending. His autobiography, unpublished, called Life on the Margin, gives us a picture of a life well lived. In the parlance of the day, he was a race man, one of those noble figures of the past who always kept the interest of his race foremost. And he was an optimist. One had to be an optimist to declare, as he did, that I was born in the best time possible for a Negro to be born in the United States. It was September 5th, 1863, he wrote, some months after the Emancipation Proclamation had gone into effect, which freed 4 million slaves. It did not, however, free the slaves in Kentucky, for the state, not being in open rebellion against the federal government, was accepted from the provisions of the proclamation. It was not until 2 years later, in 1865, that the Negroes of Kentucky were actually and legally freed by the application of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. It was many years thereafter that the Constitution of Kentucky was made to conform to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the federal Constitution. In reality, therefore, it might truthfully be said that I, born in 1863, was technically a slave for 2 years. But he had another great reason for confidence. Jane Arthur, an extraordinary mother, unlearned, unlettered, who, as he said, though herself a slave, was in many respects a remarkable woman, above the average in intelligence and vision of the women of her day. Had I the choice of a mother, I could scarcely have chosen one better qualified to lay the foundation of my later life, or one better able to direct my footsteps and give inspiration in time of need and discouragement. She was a remarkable woman. She had been carried away from her home, parents, all that she held dear in life. For though a slave, her sensitive spirit must have felt the agony of that separation. When a mere child and set down in new surroundings, to battle her way as best she could among her fellow slaves and adjust herself to a new master. When freed by the Civil War, her one loyal wish was to return to her mother's home, where she was reunited with her parents and 2 sisters. From that day, she dedicated herself to the training and educating of her 2 sons and laid the foundation for their careers in the high ideals which she always held before them. When I was young, she would tell me that if I was honest and polite and showed proper respect for old age and got an education, I might become President of the United States someday, and I believed her. Of course, I've long since given up the idea of aspiring to that exalted position, and like a well-known public man of the present, I do not now choose to run for the presidency. But it fired my imagination, it strengthened my purpose to overcome whatever obstacle might be found in my way. To use a favorite expression of those days, it made me wish to be somebody and make a man of myself. It's a little amusing now, but very significant, to recall how in those fresh days of emancipation, the same bright dreams of unlimited opportunity that encouraged the white boys and girls of America were vigorous and convincing in the minds of the freedmen. And if they were fanciful and impractical, they were at the same time inconceivably powerful agents in giving nerve and sinew to a degraded race. I do not mean to suggest that the spirit has departed from Negroes of the present generation, for the ferment is still, fortunately, at work. But I do feel it will mean disaster for the Negro if such optimism born of the essential spirit of our country is lost to him. She was a heroic figure. She symbolizes for me today the mute yet glorious yet tragic destiny of the Negro slave woman, bowed indeed beneath the weight of centuries, yet possessed of a stark spark of courage and hope that transfigured her life and shed a radiance upon the life of those with whom she came in contact. To her children she bequeathed that spark and threw around them that happy radiance. I honor and revere her memory today. He wrote about the Kentucky mountains where he grew up. He said, they were a hard school in which a youngster could learn much of life and people. Life, he said, was real and in deadly earnestness. The sort of preparation received there in many cases drowned any flame of ambition that might once have burned in the heart of a boy and consigned him ever afterward to the monotonous routine of the hills. But it served as a toughening school for the souls of others and equipped them to venture out into the world beyond the mountain range to the west and to seek new experience, new friends, new worlds to essay and to conquer. It was a visit to the White Jarvis family, for whom his mother worked, by Berea President E.H. Fairchild, that convinced then 15-year-old James Bond to come to school here. He heard Fairchild preach a sermon in a log cabin schoolhouse, and James Bond wrote, he appeared to be rather warm and was perspiring freely. My mother was sitting nearby, and true to her instinct to find an opportunity to render some sort of service, thoughtfully handed him a fan, made in the fashion of those days from the wing of a turkey. Was her act prophetic of the time, soon to come, when her son should look in wide-eyed wonder at the glories of Berea College as he entered her doors as a raw student from the hills? Was that act of kindness suggested to her by the same divine providence that appointed her son to be the person that to watch at the bedside of this great man on the night he passed away, and selected her boy to be one of the students who bore his body from the home to the cemetery a mile away? I do not know, but I am more and more convinced that there is a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them as we may. I do remember he wrote that it was the sight of President Fairchild that made me make up my mind then and there to go to Berea College, to get an education, to make a man of myself. And I remember also when President Fairchild returned to Berea, he sent my mother a box of books which gave my brother and me plenty of reading for a year to come. That set of books became almost a circulating library of the whole community, white and colored alike. So widely was it used by these people hungry for information and diversion. From this day on, I dreamed of Berea, thought of it constantly, and finally, with the aid of my mother, was able to put my resolution into operation. I was 15 years old. The fall arrived, and I prepared to go out into the unknown world to the west. The portion of Kentucky he was leaving behind, he writes, had enjoyed a kinder, more benign form of slavery than did states in the Deep South. And in the mountains where he lived, relative peace and harmony prevailed among blacks and whites in the days after the Civil War. But James Bond thought emancipation had created many problems because of two grave mistakes. While slavery was wrong, he believed with great compassion, greater than I might summon myself, that the victorious North should have compensated the slave owners for their lost property. He wrote that the failure to do so created in the dominant class in the South a sincere sense of grievance and injustice. And the second mistake, he wrote, was the assumption that the mere act of abolition solved all of the problems of the Negro and gave him an absolutely fair chance to start at the ground floor with the rest of America and build upward. It should be realized that emancipation itself did not give the Negro the economic resources which his labor had helped to accumulate through the centuries. As a result, he began new life not only with the dead weight of social tradition in the balance against him, but also without any considerable amount of financial resources which might have come through his employment as free labor. By the time I was about to enter Berea, the vicious seeds of these mistakes were bearing full fruitage. The Ku Klux Klan, he writes, aided in breaking the newfound spirit of the Negro masses. The first flush of hopes wore off. The drab necessities of existence bore down on the freedman, discouraged his first ready efforts for enlightenment and progress. With a more sober spirit, a somewhat chastened ambition, the Negro began to face the future with less confidence, but perhaps with more intelligence. The conviction became embedded in the very being of the race that the solution of many of its problems could best be reached through education. What sort of education this would be was uncertain at best, but what was as certain as life itself was that book learning was indeed a solvent for all perplexing combinations in the world. James Bond learned much here too. When he arrived here, he didn't know how old he was, for he wrote, "I'd not learned to tell time that way. I'd been taught to estimate the passage of time by the first big frost, or the last snow, or the time when the brindle cow died. Up to this time, I do not remember ever seeing a watch or a clock. We had no such mechanical luxuries in our house, and as a result, we estimated the hours of the day by the sun. At night, we didn't need to know the time. I was all of 18 and 19 years old before I learned to tell time by the clock or a watch." To make the trip here, he took with him all of his belongings, an extra shirt or two, 1 or 2 handkerchiefs, an extra pair of flannels, and I carried it all easily in a pillowcase. And on foot, leading his tuition on a rope, the trip took him 2.5 days. Here he grew, here he matured, here he learned, here he graduated. As I've said, Berea asked him to give the commencement address, and I quoted some of it when I began. I want to close with some other lines from that speech. Standing before a Berea audience, all those many, many years ago, James Bond, reflecting this incurable optimism, said, "The false partitions set up to separate classes and races are falling down. Illogical and unchristian distinctions, though still disgracing the age and hampering the spirit of progress, must soon yield to justice and right. Then forward in the struggle for advancement. Wrong for a time may seem to prevail. The good already accomplished seem to be overthrown. But forward in the struggle, inspired by the achievements of the past, sustained by a faith that knows no faltering, forward in the struggle. Behold the dawn of a brighter day. You may not see it, but it will come." That optimism sustains us still. Thank you.
The Fee Award intends to honor those Berea alumni families who reflect the ideas of John Fee and his vision, as evidenced in the motto, "God is made of one blood, all people of the earth," and also who have rendered distinguished service to their local or national communities. It is that which we celebrate this evening. This evening, then, it's my privilege to offer the John G. Fee Award, which is a walnut box made by Woodcraft that inside has a traditional woven runner that's been woven by contemporary Berea College students. In fact, this pattern was a pattern that would have been known in your grandfather's day. On this box is a bird, a Sankofa. In the Akan language, it means in rough terms, look back and learn. Hence, this program this evening is intended to remind us that if we look back and listen carefully to the words we've just heard from the man who wrote them more than 100 years ago, we too can learn. And so it's my privilege this evening to give this box that has the John G. Fee Award symbol on the front, given to the Bond family in honor of the Reverend Dr. James Bond, October 2003. then ask the Black Music Ensemble to come and celebrate with us your music.